So welcome everyone to our presentation. Essentially, our question was, how do GCSE learners with ESOL needs respond to teaching interventions of key words and phrases specific to GCSE maths? Really what we're asking is, how can we support our ESOL learners with mathematics? As Durkin and Shire say, mathematics education begins in language, it advances and stumbles because of language, and its outcomes are often assessed in language. I'm going to leave you now with Liz and Mohammed for the majority of the presentation.
All right, so I'm going to talk first a little bit about our background. From a couple of weeks ago, you might have heard that we are a large FE college in the borough of Newham in East London. And our learners, the makeup of our learners largely is reflects that of the borough. So we have significant problems with poverty and inequality, and one of the youngest populations of the boroughs in the UK. We have approximately 1,150 GCSE and FS maths learners, and a significant number of our GCSE maths learners have ESOL needs, or often, if they don't have English as a second language themselves, English is not necessarily the first language spoken at home. So they might have been born in the UK, but they have a different primary language at home. We also have significant numbers of students who English is the first language, but they have GCSE English. We have a significant number of GCSE English research students as well. So why did we want to do this question? Well, it's quite evident from our college that this is a fairly big issue for us. We were all feeling that the language of maths was a barrier to progress and achievement for our learners. And we were very keen to trial some specific interventions. And obviously we wanted to measure that impact on the learners, how they felt about that in the classroom as a tool, and then potentially on their maths learning as well. We did want to originally measure an impact on GCSE exam results, but obviously that has had to change. I'm going to hand over to Mohammed to talk about our influences and research.
Thanks, Liz. There have been influences, some from the research and some from our everyday teaching. In fact, an additional inspiration came from the work that our maths teaching team had carried out with communication support worker for a learner with a hearing impairment. The team have created a list of key terms and phrases in maths that he is struggling to understand and use in context. Our action research links closely to constructivist theory as well, because the intervention plan provided a framework on which learners can build up their knowledge gradually on a specific topic. Our action research also strongly linked to maths mastery. We know that if the learners cannot access the language, they cannot master the topic, and therefore less likely to progress and achieve. Liz, over to you.
So just an addition on that, something to note is that, the original research didn't come from a learner with ESOL needs, but essentially he has BSL as his primary language, but it's quite an interesting crossover with different groups. So this is a bit of a timeline of what we did since sort of September of 2019. The prior influences that was done with the communication support worker was prior to this. So this was 18-19 academic year. So I'll let you sort of have a look at that. And we had involved in this action research, it was the three of us. We had 3 teachers, 4 GCSE maths classes and 52 learners. So it was fairly small scale, but we really wanted to focus on the intervention, the model. We did pre and post intervention assessments to track their progress. And we also planned to have 2 peer observations per teacher, with observation schedules to focus on those learners identified in the class. As I say, ESOL in inverted commas, because it was a slightly wider remit of learners. So we wanted learners to build up the gradually a library of Freya models. We'll talk a little bit more about what the Freya model is in a moment, but this is the intervention that we chose to address the ESOL needs. And we had laminated large collaborative class models as well as individual models. We also did a bit of a test with our network partners and our partner college Westminster Kingsway with Teacher CPD, to get feedback from there, and we widened it out to our network partners to see how they would approach it with their students as well. So I'm going to hand over to Mohammed now to take you through the terms that we chose to look at.
In order to use the Freya model as an intervention, we first had to choose the keywords which we felt proved to a barrier to our learners. We tried to choose words which we felt were commonly misunderstood or misinterpreted from the topics we were teaching. And in order to choose the key terms or phrases, we used 3 different sources as wide lists. The first one is the in-house developed list. And the second one was Pearson Edexcel command words. And also the one that was from NCETM. And those are the words that we used.
And so just to note, these are the words, so you'll notice that it's a lot of geometry and a little bit of algebra. That's because our scheme of work at the time was finishing off with algebra and then moving on to geometry for a certain amount of time. So that's why we chose those keywords, because it fit into January to February to March periods. So this, if you're all wondering, is the Freya model. And so we chose to test how GCSE learners responded to using this Freya model in class, out of class, as a whole class activity. And it's essentially a graphic organizer for building up and scaffolding their vocabulary. And it's also a way in for them. We found that it's really hard to come up with a definition for a mathematical term. So under Mastery, you talk about examples and non-examples and non-standard examples as well. So we often found that learners were doing the examples and non-examples first, then building up to a definition. And that also meant that you could focus on the language rather than focusing on the specific spelling mistakes or trying to understand the key term first. So what we'd like you to do is just have a really quick go. We're going to have to keep it fairly tight to time because we've got a fairly tight time, but completing a Freya model yourself. So if you want to go to, and it can be done on your phone, on a laptop, student.desmos.com. Julie is hopefully going to put that into the chat for me. And type in WSV9J3. Now it's obviously a little bit harder to do because you're essentially drawing on a screen, but if you just want to have a try doing it for area online, and I'm going to show you just for about a minute or minute and a half or so, the ones that you come up with. Now remember, your answers won't actually be seen by everyone. It is going to be anonymized. You'll get a mathematician's name. So we've got one response that was done earlier. You can see, hopefully, you should be able to see my screen here. So you can still see the Freya model whiteboard. If you haven't used Desmos before, this is, by the way, this is the teacher version. Oh, I can see the numbers are going up. So we've got a 5 now. We'll just see what you guys can come up with. It's a little bit of an experiment. So we've got some examples of a triangle. Oh, I've gone back. Area of a triangle. Some definitions come up with. So it is often actually that with teachers, we think of the definitions ourselves. It is worth remembering, you know, maybe what your learners might put, any common misconceptions that they might think. And we'll come on to that a little bit later. Oh, I like the pictorial representation there of the space inside the shape, sort of trying to draw it. And we've got some non-examples of lines, things like that. So yeah, already you can see that it's quite an easy thing to just start off with and to get learners into. I'm gonna have to move on now, but what we'll do is we'll get all of these together and send them over for the Padlet a little bit later. You can add to them if you want as we go through. That's essentially what the Freya model is. And this is some live things that our students did. So this is an example of an individual student model. We have a few more in the report, and we also have more that we can send if you're interested. And what we found, that it was actually really interesting to be able to come up with the misconceptions that the learners had. So if you're really beady-eyed, you'll notice down here that it actually says the learners put the area of a circle is 2 pi r. Now that's wrong. We know that that's wrong. That's the circumference. But this was a way that in class we could bring up those misconceptions and really address it with the learners. And then what we did was we also had learners contributing to a collaborative class model, either on Active Inspire, which is just an online on-screen tool, or by using larger laminated models. Mohammed is going to talk to you a little bit about those laminated models.
Yes, we have also used a large A4 laminated version of the Freya model in small groups or with whole class. Learners had the opportunity to add their own input to the model and also discuss it with the other learners in the class. Next slide, please.
I'm just going to say a little bit more on this. So we also, on the laminated ones, we were also able to use different colour pens with the learners if we really wanted to see what each learner was doing. And we also found, particularly with certain keywords like the word variable, our learners were like, I have no idea how to even approach this or solve, or really weird words. And this wasn't just ESOL learners, this was learners from across the board. And it was really, really useful as a collaborative class model, and for us as teachers to actually think, okay, what do we need to draw out? What do we need to make sure that learners understand and can do? So Mohammed's going to take you through a bit of how we collected our data about what the responses to these models were.
Yeah. We were planning to do pre-intervention assessment and 6 in-class observations, post-intervention assessment, and student evaluation at the end. We did the pre-intervention assessment in the class as planned, but unfortunately, due to the COVID, we were only able to complete 1 peer observation of each teacher. We then adapted the post-intervention assessment and the student evaluation to online forms as well. And then the data is collected. So now I'm going to talk about the key findings. So a paired t-test was run on a sample of 21 learners who completed both the pre-test and the post-test. And we found a statistically significant increase of 24% in favor of the post-test mean scores. We then used box plots also to compare the post-tests and the pre-tests. And the box plots show that the post-intervention assessment scores have higher median than the pre-intervention assessment scores. Indeed, the median of the post-intervention assessment scores lies entirely outside the box of the pre-intervention assessment scores. And this further supports the claim that there is an overall improvement in the scores in the post-intervention assessment.
And we then further looked into particular word-by-word interventions, because we were quite aware that for some words, some learners might really struggle, other words, they might struggle less, or they might be more confident, and tracked the percentage change. So tracked from where those learners started to where they ended up, but according to whether they had the intervention or not. So the pink one is the one on the intervention words. The purple one on the right here is the one without the intervention. And so we were limited, we limited this to quite a small number of students because it was a lot of data to process. And it was for 8 of the 9 learners that we focused on in the peer observation. One of the learners wasn't able to do the post-test because it was online. But you can see that with the intervention, learners only had a positive increase for those words in terms of how they did pre to post test. Without the intervention, some learners got a little bit worse. Some learners got a lot worse. Some learners got a bit better. It is difficult, however, to unpick, because obviously we were still doing normal teaching, whether it was the intervention or if they missed that particular word, that also might have meant that they missed the lesson, which could have had quite a big impact as well. So it is quite difficult to see, but at the moment it's quite positive. And so We also carried out those observations, peer observations, and we did learner feedback with the evaluation. And it really showed there was some quite positive information that came out from this. Learners were using the models independently. It wasn't just when teachers prompted them to do it. Learners were also stating that they were using it for their revision outside of class and as a revision model. Some learners also referred to, in later lessons, to previously created models. And we also had looking at it, the model helped learners remembering equations and formulas. Models also helped most learners with language used in GCSE maths questions, and it helped some really create that discussion, and it gave, you know, the confidence for learners to be able to discuss those mathematical concepts. And overall, there were positive responses to further use of the model, with no respondents saying they wouldn't use it again. So that was a really big positive thing. Usually you get some students at least who will say they wouldn't use the model. Obviously we'd need to carry that out on a wider scale. Yeah, so we've got a 3-minute warning, we've got our limitations here, which is fine, and then we're going to go on to conclusions. So obviously the sample of participants was really quite small, and we weren't able to do it by any randomization mechanism. It's not particularly representative of all GCSE learners, but it was taken from learners from different courses. So we had motor vehicle, IT, business, a real sort of a range of learners. We do caution, don't generalize it. And we also caution in terms of using it in class, you would need to modify it for your learners, for your students. The post-test being in lockdown also affected the amount of data we could have. We had, in terms of student evaluations, only 9 learners sort of completed that, so it was difficult. It was very limited due to the fact that it was online respondents. So we'd really like to be able to conduct them in class time. And I'm going to hand over to Mohammed for the conclusions.
The conclusions: quick and easy teaching tool to use in the classroom. Good way. It was also a good way of getting learners to approach unknown words, work with definitions and model mathematical examples. It worked well as a whole class activity, both interactively online and in small groups on laminated copies, as well as a support for individuals to create and refer to. And it allowed for all learners to input and for a wide range of responses. CfEM network group feedback was positive. In particular, all teachers felt it was a really good way of uncovering common learning misconceptions, and it was applicable to all learners, not just ESOL learners. The process, we thought that the process could be a bit repetitive, and a better way of using it maybe for planning and anticipating their own examples. It also worked better for some words rather than the others. So there is need to be careful consideration and forward planning of the choice of the words that are most easily represented in this kind of model. The last bullet point is, throughout the project, we also discovered that being able to master the language of mathematics also contributed improved discussion of mathematical concepts. And also, lastly, we can say that it gave ESOL learners a springboard from which they could then participate more freely and more confidently in mathematical discussions. Julie?
So Lou, I'm going to borrow one more second. So just to say, we have decided that we're going to carry on with this project next year. So it's what we're going to do. We've seen it so many times since we decided to start using it. We've decided we're going to use it as a planning tool to help us think about misconceptions. We're going to expand it to our network partners, and for our accent research next year continuation, we're going to look at other vocabulary intervention tools. Thank you for listening.